The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon when Jake Harper stepped onto the weathered porch of his farmhouse, his gaze fixed on the expansive fields that stretched out before him. His family had worked this land for generations, each row of crops a testament to decades of hard, honest labor. The hum of his tractor, the rustle of wind through the cornstalks, and the occasional caw of a crow were the sounds that made up his life. For as long as Jake could remember, the land was his to care for, and nothing, not even the most advanced technology, could ever replace the deep connection he had with it. He wasn't just a farmer, he was a steward of the earth. His ancestors had tilled this soil with their hands, and he intended to do the same, passing the farm down to his own children one day. But today, everything was about to change. Jake's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car engine approaching. He turned to see a sleek black Tesla winding its way down the gravel driveway. The car came to a stop in front of the farmhouse, and out stepped none other than Elon Musk, the man who had reshaped the world with electric cars, rockets, and AI. Jake's brows furrowed. What in the world would Elon Musk want with a small-town farmer like him? He wasn't sure if this was some kind of publicity stunt or a genuine attempt at a partnership, but either way, he wasn't about to let this tech mogul walk all over him or his farm. Elon walked toward him with a friendly grin, extending his hand. "Jake Harper, I presume?" he asked, his voice calm and confident. "Yeah, that's me," Jake replied, taking the hand but giving him a skeptical look. "And I'm guessing you're Elon Musk?" Elon nodded, his grin never fading. "That's right. It's a pleasure to meet you." Jake studied him for a moment, sizing him up. Elon was everything Jake wasn't: polished, futuristic, and probably used to getting whatever he wanted. Jake, on the other hand, was rugged, grounded in tradition, and firmly believed that the land was something to be respected, not meddled with. "Glad to meet you, I guess," Jake said, his voice not quite as warm as Elon's. "But I'm curious, what brings you all the way out here? This is a long way from Silicon Valley." Elon's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Well, Jake, I believe the future of farming is going to be shaped by technology. I'm here to talk to you about how we can take your farm into the future, sustainably, efficiently, and profitably." Jake's expression hardened. "Sustainably, huh? Well, I've been farming these fields long before you were launching rockets, Mr. Musk. I don't need a bunch of gadgets and gizmos to make things work around here." Elon didn't flinch. "I get it. You're doing things the way your family has always done them. But what if I told you that the future of farming doesn't have to mean abandoning tradition? What if I told you we could use technology to make your farming more efficient, more productive, and better for the environment?" Jake crossed his arms and leaned back against the porch railing. "I've heard it all before. People come around here with big promises of high-tech solutions that'll change everything, but nothing ever works the way they say it will." Elon smiled, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "That's exactly why I'm here. I don't want to replace what you're doing, I want to enhance it. Think of it like this: imagine having a system that helps you monitor your soil health in real time, reduces water usage by half, and automates the most grueling tasks. All of it powered by clean energy." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a pipe dream to me." "I promise you, it's not. With technology, we can make your farm not only more efficient but more sustainable. Less water waste, better crop yields, and less labor on your end." Jake stared at Elon, trying to wrap his head around the words he was hearing. Part of him wanted to dismiss it all, to tell Elon to go back to his shiny, futuristic world and leave him alone. But there was a nagging curiosity, a part of him that wondered if perhaps there was something to this idea. "I don't know," Jake said, his voice low. "I've worked this farm my whole life. It's been hard, but it's been good. And I don't see any reason to mess with what works." Elon took a step closer, his voice growing more earnest. "I understand that. But you've seen the challenges, haven't you? Crop prices fluctuating, water shortages, soil depletion. It's only going to get worse. What if there was a way to address all those problems without losing what makes your farm yours? Jake's jaw tightened. I don't know about all that. I've been farming long enough to know what the land needs. You can't just throw technology at it and expect it to work. Elon chuckled, clearly not offended. I'm not saying you should just trust me. What I'm offering is a partnership, not a takeover. We can start small, test out some ideas, see if they work for you. If they don't, we walk away. But I believe we can make a real difference here. Jake studied Elon for a long moment, the sun casting long shadows over the fields. He wasn't sure what to make of this man or his ideas, but there was something about Elon's confidence that made it hard to simply dismiss him. Maybe, just maybe, there was something worth considering. All right, Jake said finally, a hint of reluctance in his voice. I'll give it a shot. But don't expect me to just roll over. We'll do it my way, on my terms. Elon's face lit up, and he extended his hand once more. That's all I'm asking. We'll work together, and we'll see what happens. As they shook hands, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of unease mixed with curiosity. He wasn't sure if this was the beginning of something great or just another misguided attempt to turn his farm into something it wasn't. But one thing was for certain, his world was about to be shaken up in ways he hadn't anticipated. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next morning, the farmhouse was quiet as Jake sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee. His hands, rough and calloused from years of hard labor, cradled the mug with a certain ease, but his mind was far from calm. He was thinking about the conversation he had had with Elon Musk the day before, about the technology, the promises, and the uneasy feeling in his gut. Could it really work? Was he too stubborn to see the possibilities, or was he just being practical? The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room until his wife, Emily, walked in, her face flushed from a morning run. She was a picture of energy, a stark contrast to Jake's more grounded demeanor. She had been with him through thick and thin, raising 3 kids on this farm and keeping their home in order while Jake worked the land. Morning, Emily said, grabbing a mug and filling it with coffee. She glanced at Jake, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. What's got you so deep in thought this morning? Jake let out a long sigh. Elon Musk showed up yesterday. Wants to partner up, bring some of his tech to the farm. Emily froze, her hand halfway to her mouth with her coffee. Elon Musk? The Tesla guy? Yeah, Jake muttered, rubbing his temples. I don't know, Em. I don't know what to think about it. He's talking about all this fancy tech, automated systems, AI, energy-efficient gadgets, and I'm just trying to figure out if any of it's really worth it. Emily set her mug down and sat across from him. Jake, you're the one who always says we need to keep up with the times. Maybe this is your chance to do just that. Jake shook his head. I don't know, Em. The land has always been good to us. We've had our struggles, sure, but we've always gotten through. Why mess with something that's been working for generations? Emily leaned forward, her eyes filled with understanding. I get it, Jake. I do. You've worked this farm your whole life, and you're proud of it. But sometimes, maybe we need to look at the bigger picture. There are other farms around here that are struggling. Some are barely making it. And if there's a chance this could help, shouldn't we at least consider it? Jake sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation. I guess. But it just doesn't feel right, you know. I've always believed that farming is about the land, not gadgets. I don't know if I want to hand over control of my farm to some machine. Emily reached across the table and placed her hand over his. You don't have to hand over control. You've always said you wanted to protect this land. Maybe technology is just another tool to help you do that. I think it's worth exploring. Jake sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. He knew Emily was right. They had been through thick and thin together, and she had always supported his decisions. But this was different. This was a challenge to everything he had believed in. Maybe I'm just being stubborn, Jake muttered. But I've seen what happens when you let technology take over. Farms get bought out, people lose their jobs, and the land gets treated like just another commodity. Emily nodded slowly, taking a sip of her coffee. I understand that, Jake. But if we do this right, it doesn't have to be that way. Technology doesn't have to replace everything, it can work alongside what you've already built. I think this could be a way to preserve what we have, not just for us, but for future generations too. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had always wanted to leave something lasting for his children, something that could carry on his family's legacy. But at what cost? Just then, their youngest daughter, Lily, came running into the kitchen. She was 10, full of energy, and had inherited her father's love for the farm. Dad, do you think the crops will be okay this year? She asked, her wide eyes full of concern. Jake smiled at her, the tension easing a little. I hope so, kiddo. We're doing everything we can. Do you think we could plant more next year? She asked eagerly. Like, maybe more strawberries. I love strawberries. Jake chuckled softly, the thought of expanding the farm bringing a small spark of hope. We'll see, Lil. We'll see. Emily turned her attention back to Jake. See. She's growing up in a world where technology and farming can go hand in hand. Maybe it's time to think about how we can give her, and the future, more opportunities. Jake watched Lily run outside to the garden, her feet barely touching the ground as she dashed toward the strawberry patch. The sight of her, so carefree and full of life, made something stir deep within him. The farm wasn't just his legacy, it was his children's future. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to think beyond the old ways of doing things. I don't know if I'm ready for all this tech stuff, Jake admitted quietly. But I'll think about it. Maybe we should give it a shot and see where it goes. Emily smiled, relief washing over her. That's all I'm asking. Just give it a shot. You never know, Jake. It could change everything. Jake nodded slowly, a part of him still uncertain but willing to give it a try. After all, what did he have to lose? If anything, the farm needed a new direction. The world was changing, and so was the way people thought about food, sustainability, and the environment. Maybe, just maybe, technology could be a bridge to that future without completely losing the heart and soul of the farm. Later that afternoon, Jake sat in the rocking chair on the porch, staring out at the land once more. The wind rustled through the corn, and he could almost hear the whispers of his ancestors, urging him to keep going. But this time, the wind didn't feel as familiar. It was as if it was calling him toward something new, something uncertain. As the sun set on another day, Jake thought about the promise of new beginnings, and the uncertainty of what was to come. Tomorrow, he'd meet with Elon again, and maybe he'd finally begin to understand what it meant to bring the future to the farm. But for tonight, he'd let the world rest on the horizon. Tomorrow, he'd take the first step into the unknown. The days after Elon Musk's visit seemed to blur together in a haze of uncertainty. Jake had agreed to give the partnership a try, but every day since, he wrestled with doubt. It wasn't that he didn't want to keep the farm going, or that he was afraid of change. It was simply that he felt like the ground beneath his feet was shifting in a way that felt unnatural. The farm had always been his, a part of him, and now, it felt like something, or someone, else was trying to claim it. Elon had promised a team of engineers and experts would be on site soon to start assessing the land, mapping out a plan for integrating technology into the farming processes. Jake wasn't sure what exactly that meant, but he had agreed to go along with it, for now. He spent the first few days looking for ways to ease into the changes without disrupting the natural rhythm of the farm. After all, he wasn't one to dive into anything without fully understanding what was at stake. He didn't like the idea of machines replacing hands-on work, nor did he like the notion that his farm could be commodified into something impersonal. The farm was about more than profits, it was about family, hard work, and tradition. But Emily kept pushing him to consider the possibilities, reminding him that they had to adapt to the times. "We can't hold on to the past forever, Jake," she'd said one night over dinner, her voice full of quiet conviction. "We have to look at what's ahead, not just what's behind us. I know it's hard, but this could make a difference." Still, Jake found it hard to let go. The farm, with its rolling fields of wheat and rows of cornstalks, had always been enough for him. He had always found pride in the simplicity of it all. Now, he was being asked to open the doors to technology that promised efficiency and better yields, but at what cost? He could see it now: sensors in the soil, drones hovering above the crops, robots making their way through the fields. It wasn't a future that resonated with him, but he couldn't deny that the traditional ways of farming were becoming increasingly hard to sustain. It wasn't just the weather that made things difficult. Prices were down, labor was scarce, and even basic farming practices were becoming more challenging. And then there was the question of Elon himself. He was an enigma, a man who seemed to float above everything, untouched by the struggles that ordinary people faced. Sure, he had revolutionized industries: electric cars, reusable rockets, artificial intelligence, but could he really understand the needs of someone like Jake? Someone who had worked the same land day in and day out, year after year, with nothing but sweat and determination? Jake was about to find out. One afternoon, as Jake was finishing up his work in the barn, a sleek black Tesla pulled up to the farm once again. It was Elon, and this time, he wasn't alone. A group of engineers and consultants stepped out of the car, their faces all business as they surveyed the land. They looked like a team from another world, their clothes pristine and their eyes trained on gadgets and data, not the dirt beneath their feet. Elon greeted Jake with his usual enthusiasm. "Good to see you again, Jake. This is Sarah, Tom, and Michael. They'll be helping us assess the property and come up with a plan to incorporate some of the latest technologies into your operations." Jake shook each of their hands, his grip firm, though he could feel the tension rising in his chest. "Nice to meet you all," he said, though the words felt hollow. "We've reviewed your farm's size, soil composition, and irrigation systems," Elon said as he motioned to the engineers. "We've got some great ideas that'll make everything run more smoothly, while also reducing water waste and improving crop yields." Jake crossed his arms, eyeing Elon skeptically. "I'm listening." Elon smiled, almost as if he expected this. "We'd like to install a series of soil sensors to monitor pH levels and nutrient content in real time. We'll also introduce a set of drones to monitor crop health from above, allowing us to identify any potential issues before they become a problem." Jake frowned. "And what exactly does all that do for me?" "It's all about efficiency," Elon replied, his voice calm and persuasive. "The sensors and drones will give you real-time data on your crops, letting you know when to water, when to fertilize, and when to harvest. It'll save you time and resources, and ensure that the farm runs more sustainably." Jake's frown deepened. "And what happens to the way we've been doing things? What happens to the hands-on work I've always done?" Elon's face softened slightly, but his tone remained confident. "This doesn't replace the hard work, Jake. It's just an enhancement. We can help you work smarter, not harder. You're still in control of the farm, but we're giving you the tools to make more informed decisions." Jake didn't respond immediately, his mind racing with thoughts of what this would mean for his future. He had always prided himself on being self-reliant, using his intuition to decide when to plant, water, or harvest. He didn't need machines to tell him what to do. But now, he had to admit, he didn't have all the answers. And with the challenges of modern farming bearing down on him, maybe, just maybe, this was the way forward. Sarah, one of the engineers, stepped forward with a tablet in her hand, showing Jake a map of the farm with different zones marked for sensor installation. "These are the areas we recommend monitoring first," she said. "We can tailor the technology to match your farming style, starting with small changes and scaling up as you become more comfortable." Jake looked at the tablet, his eyes tracing the lines and colors on the screen. He could see the potential, but a nagging sense of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Could he really trust these people, these strangers, to understand what he had worked so hard to build? "Let's start small," Jake said, finally breaking the silence. "I'll give you the green light for the sensors and drones, but we're not changing everything overnight. This farm has a rhythm, and I'm not about to throw that off just because of a few gadgets." Elon nodded, his expression unreadable, but he was clearly pleased with the compromise. "That's all I'm asking for. We'll move at your pace, Jake." As the team started setting up equipment around the farm, Jake stood by, watching warily. He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to change, and not all of it was within his control. He had agreed to the partnership, but was it really the right decision? One thing was for certain, this was only the beginning. The conflict was rising, and soon, Jake would have to decide just how far he was willing to go to embrace the future, at what cost to the past. The first few weeks of the new technology integration on the farm were a mix of tension and curiosity. Jake found himself standing in the fields more often than he ever had, his eyes scanning the skies for the buzzing drones that hovered above the crops. They were sleek, quiet, and efficient, an odd contrast to the rustling sounds of the wind through the wheat and the creaking of his old tractor. He felt a little out of place, as though he was watching the world change too quickly for him to keep up. Emily, on the other hand, was embracing it wholeheartedly. The automated irrigation systems had made a significant difference, ensuring that the crops received just the right amount of water at the right time. Sarah, one of the engineers, had returned several times to adjust the software, and each time she left, Emily seemed more excited about the possibilities. "Jake, look!" Emily called out one afternoon, pointing to the tablet she was holding. "The sensors just sent us data about the soil's nutrient levels. We can adjust the fertilizer schedule right now, without wasting anything." Jake glanced at the screen but remained skeptical. "It's all well and good, Em, but how do we know it's really working? Just because it tells you something doesn't mean it's the right thing." Emily walked over to him, her expression hopeful but understanding. "I get it. I know it's a lot to take in. But think about it this way, we're getting data we've never had access to before. We can make decisions that are based on real information, not just guesswork." Jake looked out over the farm, his thoughts in conflict. Part of him wanted to embrace this new world, this world that offered solutions, efficiency, and the promise of better crop yields. But another part of him feared that by relying too heavily on technology, he was losing something deeper, something irreplaceable. "Maybe," he muttered, his voice filled with hesitation, "but I still don't like the idea of not being able to feel the soil under my hands, of not seeing the crops up close every day. There's something special about that connection to the land, Em. I don't want to lose it." Emily's smile softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "I don't think you're going to lose it, Jake. This technology doesn't take away what's important. It just gives us a new way to do things. You're still in charge. It's just different." As Jake mulled over her words, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon, Elon Musk. He had stopped by a few times since the technology was implemented, checking on progress, making adjustments, and offering further support. Jake had to admit that, while Elon could be frustratingly aloof, he was good at what he did. The results were speaking for themselves, at least, in some ways. Elon climbed out of the Tesla with his usual charisma, the sunlight catching the edges of his suit as he waved at Jake from a distance. "Jake, how's it going? How are the drones working out for you?" Jake had to admit, the drones were fascinating to watch. They flitted above the crops, scanning and gathering data faster than Jake had ever imagined. But while they were impressive, they still didn't feel quite right. They were tools, nothing more. "They're doing their job," Jake replied, his tone cautious. "But I still don't know if they're really helping us." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Not helping. They're providing data faster than any human could. It's not just about technology for the sake of it, Jake. It's about making the farm more efficient and sustainable. And don't forget, we've reduced water usage by 30% already." Jake shifted uncomfortably, his arms crossed as he looked over the fields. "I get the numbers. But you don't understand, farming's not just about numbers. It's about what the land tells you. It's about the feel of the soil, the seasons, the rhythm. You can't put a price on that." Elon tilted his head thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing as he considered Jake's words. "I get that, Jake. I do. But think about it like this, you're not replacing the land. You're enhancing it. Technology can't replace the feeling of working the soil, but it can give you the tools to do it better, more efficiently. It's about working smarter, not harder." Jake remained silent for a moment, his mind caught between the old ways and the new. Elon was right in some ways, there was potential here to make things better. But he couldn't help feeling like the farm was becoming something that was no longer entirely his. The more technology they added, the less he felt like the one truly in charge. The conversation drifted to other topics, but the tension lingered in the air. Jake couldn't help but feel that this partnership with Elon, and the technology it brought, was shifting the landscape of his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. He hadn't signed up for this level of change, this feeling of being out of control. That evening, as he sat at the kitchen table, Emily sat beside him, her hand resting on his. "You know, Jake, you don't have to do all of this alone," she said quietly. "You don't have to have all the answers. It's okay to let go a little. Maybe it's time to let the farm evolve, not just for you, but for the future." Jake looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "But what if I'm making the wrong decision? What if this doesn't work?" Emily smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "Jake, you've always been smart. You've always done what's right for us. And I believe that no matter what happens, you'll find a way to make it work. But you don't have to fight this change. You can work with it, find the balance that makes sense for you." Jake looked out the window, his gaze falling on the fields once more. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the land. It was beautiful, timeless, and for a moment, he could feel the rhythm of the earth beneath his feet. But something was different now. Something was changing. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. The farm was evolving. And with it, Jake would have to evolve, too. But that didn't mean he had to lose what mattered most. The days following the integration of the new technology felt like a roller coaster for Jake. Some mornings, he'd wake up with a renewed sense of hope, believing that the partnership with Elon and the use of advanced technology would lead to better crops and a more sustainable future. Other mornings, he'd feel the weight of doubt settling over him, as though the land he had worked so hard to nurture was slipping through his fingers. The drones were now a regular presence in the sky. Jake had to admit that they were useful. They pinpointed areas of the farm where the crops needed more water, detected diseased plants, and sent real-time reports back to the team. The soil sensors had revolutionized the way they managed irrigation, and already, they were using 30% less water than before. But despite the tangible improvements, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing something essential in the process. Then, one morning, something unexpected happened. Jake was out in the field, walking among the rows of wheat, his boots crunching the dry earth beneath him. It had been a long season, and the harvest was coming up. His mind was occupied with the usual worries, weather, soil conditions, market prices, when he noticed something different. One of the drones was hovering unusually low to the ground, its propellers whirring softly as it moved over the crops. Curious, Jake walked toward it. As he approached, the drone lifted slightly, as though it sensed his presence. On the screen attached to his arm, the real-time data began to flash, highlighting a small section of the wheat field that had not shown signs of trouble before. But now, according to the drone's readout, there was a sudden shift, one that could spell disaster if left unchecked. Jake's brow furrowed as he examined the data more closely. "This can't be right," he muttered to himself. The drone was detecting a nutrient deficiency in a part of the field that had always been healthy. But Jake knew something was off. He had planted the wheat in this area more than once before, and it had always yielded well. He called Sarah, one of the engineers who had been helping with the system's integration. "Sarah, I need you to check something," Jake said, his voice tense. "The drone's reading for the west field. There's a section here that's showing a nutrient imbalance. But I'm telling you, it doesn't make sense. This soil has been fine for years." "Hold on, let me pull up the data," Sarah replied, her voice calm but professional. After a moment, she spoke again. "You're right, Jake. That section does seem like it should be fine, but according to the sensors, there's a deficit in nitrogen levels. The system is reading it as a risk to the crop's growth." Jake took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease. He hadn't seen this coming. There had never been an issue in this part of the field before. Is there any way to adjust the system manually? Maybe the sensors are off. "I'll send a technician to recalibrate the system," Sarah said. "But just so you know, this could be a significant issue if not addressed soon. We might be able to fix it now, but if it's ignored, the crop could be compromised." As the conversation ended, Jake stood there for a moment, staring out at the fields. He could feel his heart rate increasing as he realized the truth. The technology was showing him something he might have missed on his own. This wasn't just a small issue, it was a potential disaster. And without the drone and sensors, he might have gone unnoticed, only to find himself staring at a ruined harvest come fall. For the first time, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the very technology that had once made him uneasy. The farm, his pride and joy, had been saved by the very thing he had feared would take away his control. As Sarah's team arrived to recalibrate the system, Jake watched closely, absorbing everything they did. They added a special nitrogen fertilizer to the soil in the affected area, and within hours, the drone began transmitting updates, showing that the nutrient levels were gradually improving. Later that afternoon, as Jake sat down with Emily for dinner, he finally spoke the words he had been avoiding for weeks. "I think I was wrong," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "About the technology, I mean." Emily looked at him with a gentle smile, her eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to be perfect, Jake. It's okay to change your mind." Jake nodded, pushing the food around his plate absent-mindedly. "I always thought the farm was about me, my hands, my instincts. But today, I saw how much I've been missing. It's not just about me anymore. It's about using everything at my disposal to make sure this farm survives, not just for me, but for the future." The words hung in the air between them. Emily reached out and took his hand. "You're still you, Jake. You've always made the right decisions for this farm, and you always will. But sometimes, that means making room for new ideas." As they ate, Jake's mind kept drifting back to the moment in the field, the drone, the data, the breakthrough that had changed everything. It was humbling to realize that sometimes, even the most experienced farmers didn't have all the answers. But with the right tools, they could be better equipped to find them. The next morning, Jake stood out on the balcony, watching the sun rise over the fields. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. The farm was still his legacy, his life, but it was evolving in ways he had never imagined. And as he looked out over the land, he realized something important: change wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but Jake knew one thing for sure: he didn't have to face it alone. The progress on the farm seemed to move faster with every passing day. The soil was healthier, the crops were growing stronger, and Jake had begun to open up more to the technology. But there was one thing he couldn't shake, the sense that, somewhere in all this innovation, he might be losing touch with what made the farm so special. The hum of the drones was constant, and the farm felt less like the intimate place it once was, more like a business. He could feel the weight of the future pressing in on him, pushing against his nostalgia for the simpler days. One late afternoon, as the sun began to sink low in the sky, Jake was out in the fields again, this time with Elon Musk. Elon had stopped by to check on the progress, as he did every few days. This time, though, Jake wasn't sure if he was ready to hear Elon's reassurances. There was something about Elon's unshakable confidence that had started to wear thin. "Jake, the data's looking great. The crops are thriving. Your yields are going to be higher than ever," Elon said, his eyes scanning the landscape with that familiar gleam of optimism. Jake nodded, though his mind wasn't fully on the conversation. He could see the progress, yes, but the reality of it left him feeling like an outsider in his own life. The farm, once a place of hard work and sweat, had become a test case for Elon's vision. And sometimes, Jake wondered if that was all he was, a mere player in someone else's grand plan. "I'm not so sure," Jake said slowly, his voice betraying a trace of frustration. "The crops may be doing better, but something doesn't feel right. We've got this shiny new tech, but I don't know if it's really us anymore. You said this would help us optimize everything, but what if it's just turning this place into a machine?" Elon looked at him, eyebrows raised. "Jake, the farm is a machine. It's a delicate ecosystem, sure, but ultimately, it operates like any other system. If you can understand the variables, you can improve the results. This is about sustainability, about making the farm a place that can thrive for years to come. You want that, right?" Jake's jaw tightened, and he shook his head. "I've worked this land since I was a kid. I know it better than anyone. You're talking about sustainability, but it feels like we're just building a factory. What's next? Robots doing all the work. I'll be out of a job." Elon chuckled, though it wasn't entirely light-hearted. "Jake, you're not going to be out of a job. You're the one making the decisions. But the work will change. The future of farming is about making smarter choices, using tech to help us make those decisions, not to replace the people who know the land." Jake stared at Elon for a long moment. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about making smarter choices. It's about losing something that's tied to this land. I don't want to lose that." Elon's face softened, but only for a second. "Jake, you're not losing anything. You're gaining. Look, I understand that change is hard. But look at the bigger picture. This farm isn't just about you, or even about this year's harvest. It's about setting an example for the rest of the world. This is how we fight climate change. This is how we take care of the environment. The tools you have now, these drones, the sensors, are going to help you make sure that this farm thrives for generations to come." Jake ran a hand through his hair, his frustration boiling over. "You're not listening, Elon. It's not about saving the planet or fighting climate change. It's about feeling connected to what you're doing. You talk about the bigger picture, but all I see is a bunch of machines doing the thinking for us." Elon sighed, crossing his arms. "Jake, I'm trying to help. These tools don't take away the connection to the land, they strengthen it. If you can make your decisions more effectively, you're doing right by the land. You're still in control." Jake's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to take a deep breath. "Maybe. But it sure doesn't feel that way. I'm not some farmer from the 1800s anymore. But this isn't how I imagined it would be." The silence between them hung heavy, the tension palpable. Elon's sharp mind and intense focus had always been one of his greatest strengths, but in that moment, Jake felt that it was also the thing that made him unable to understand the true cost of what was happening. Elon's voice broke through the silence. Jake, sometimes we need to let go of what we're used to in order to make progress. I know it's hard. But I promise you, this is the future. The work we're doing here will make a huge difference for everyone. Not just for you, not just for the farm, but for people all over the world who are struggling with food security and environmental challenges. Jake glanced at the horizon, feeling his heart tug in two different directions. On the one hand, he could see the benefits of what Elon was saying. The future of farming was undoubtedly changing, and in many ways, it was necessary. But on the other hand, the pull of tradition, the slow, steady rhythm of life on the farm, felt like it was slipping away, piece by piece. I don't know if I can keep up with this, Jake said quietly, his voice tinged with doubt. I don't know if I can be the guy who lets go of everything I've worked for just to embrace some shiny new future. Elon's expression softened. Jake, no one's asking you to give up what you've built. But you can't let fear of change hold you back. It's about finding the balance. Embracing technology doesn't mean abandoning your roots. It means adding a new layer of strength, so you can continue doing what you love, just more efficiently. Jake stared at Elon for a long time, the weight of the conversation settling deep within him. I'll think about it, he said finally, his voice heavy with uncertainty. As Elon walked away to check on the drones, Jake was left standing in the quiet field, the weight of the decision hanging over him. The technology was undeniably changing things, some for the better, some for the worse. And the more he tried to balance both worlds, the more difficult it seemed to find any clarity. For the first time in a long while, Jake wasn't sure if the future he was heading toward was the right one. The following days felt like a blur for Jake. He couldn't stop replaying his conversation with Elon in his mind, and with every passing hour, he felt the weight of the decision he was facing. The farm had changed so much in such a short period of time, and no matter how much he tried to adjust to it, there was a lingering sense of unease. It was early morning when Jake stood in the middle of the field, watching as a new batch of drones hovered overhead, scanning for signs of crop distress. The technology had become so integrated into the farm's routine that it was hard to imagine a time before it. The whir of the drones and the soft buzz of the automated irrigation system were now as familiar as the sound of the wind in the trees. Still, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the same place anymore. Emily joined him soon after, her boots crunching on the dry earth as she walked up beside him. She had been busy with the farm's daily operations, keeping everything running smoothly, and Jake had noticed how much more confident she seemed with the technology than he did. "Morning," she said, her voice full of energy as she reached his side. "How's the soil looking today?" Jake sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "It's looking better. The drones picked up a couple of areas with some signs of stress, but we've got a plan for it." He paused, glancing at the swirling machines in the sky. "But I still don't know. I don't know if this is the farm I remember." Emily's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Jake, I know it's a lot to adjust to. I do. But I think we need to focus on what's working. The crops are healthier, the water usage is down, and we're reaching new potential. We're making strides here, Jake." Jake turned to her, his frustration bubbling up. "I know it's working, Emily. I can see that. But it doesn't feel like us anymore. I used to be able to look at the fields and know what was wrong just by the way the plants looked. Now, I'm relying on these machines to tell me what's going on. It's like the farm's been taken out of my hands." Emily's expression shifted, and she took a step back, crossing her arms. "I get it, Jake. You've worked your whole life to make this farm what it is. But this is the next step. This is the way things are going. If you hold on to what you used to have, we might not have anything left. The world's changing, and we have to change with it." Jake's eyes narrowed as he met her gaze. "And what if I don't want to change that much? What if I just want to keep things simple? I can't help but feel like this whole thing's pushing us away from what really matters." Emily's voice softened, but there was a firmness to it. "Jake, I love this farm just as much as you do. But the truth is, the world's moving forward, whether we like it or not. You don't have to let go of what you love. You just have to find a way to work with what's coming. I believe in you, but you need to believe in this too." Her words stung, but Jake couldn't deny the truth in them. The farm was changing, and so was the world around it. He wasn't ready to give up on what he had known his entire life, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the advancements that were happening. The technology was real, and whether he liked it or not, it was already changing everything. The conversation left Jake feeling unsettled, but there was a small flicker of understanding beneath the frustration. Emily wasn't asking him to abandon the past, she was asking him to find a way to move forward, to adapt. But could he? Later that day, as Jake worked in the barn, a familiar figure appeared at the gate. It was Sarah, the engineer who had been overseeing the technology installations. She waved as she approached, carrying a tablet in her hands, her face lit up with excitement. "Jake," she greeted, her voice bright. "We've got something new to show you." Jake straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What's that?" "I think you're going to love this," Sarah said, her eyes sparkling. "We've made some upgrades to the irrigation system. The system now integrates weather predictions with real-time soil data. If it looks like there's going to be a storm, it will adjust the water flow to match the forecast. It's going to save us even more water, and give the crops exactly what they need." Jake was impressed, despite himself. "That's really something. But what does it mean for us, exactly?" Sarah grinned. "It means we're using less water, reducing waste, and staying ahead of the weather. It's like we have a smart farm now, everything's more efficient, and we're in control. We're making a real impact here." Jake nodded slowly, his mind processing the information. The technology was doing exactly what it had promised, improving efficiency, saving resources, and increasing productivity. But as he stood there with Sarah, watching the data flow in real time, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, is it enough? After a brief pause, Jake looked at Sarah, his voice more hesitant than before. "Do you ever feel like we're losing the heart of farming in all of this? Like, we're making everything so efficient, so smart, that we're forgetting the work that really matters?" Sarah's face softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "Jake, I know it's hard. But I think the heart of farming is in the people who care about the land, who nurture it. Technology doesn't replace that. It just gives you the tools to make sure the land thrives. You're still in control of how it's done." Jake looked out across the fields, his mind battling with the progress around him. He had always been the one who understood the land, who knew when something was wrong by the way the crops looked, smelled, or felt. The technology might be giving him new insights, but was it enough to replace that deep, personal connection to the earth? He didn't know. But as the sun set and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Jake felt the weight of his decision growing heavier. There was no easy answer. The future was here, whether he was ready for it or not. The next few days passed in a blur, with Jake working long hours in the fields, trying to keep up with the technology while grappling with his growing sense of doubt. Each morning, he walked out to the fields, his eyes scanning the horizon, waiting for the moment when everything would feel right again. But with every passing day, that moment seemed further out of reach. It was during one of these long days that the storm hit. The forecast had predicted rain, but not to this extent. The sky darkened, and winds howled across the plains, sending dust and debris flying. As the first raindrops fell, Jake rushed toward the irrigation control center, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached the building just in time to see the automated system kick into action. The drones and sensors began adjusting the irrigation settings based on the storm's intensity, and for a brief moment, Jake felt the familiar rush of reassurance. It was working, just like it was supposed to. But then something unexpected happened. The system failed. The irrigation pumps went haywire, pushing too much water into the fields. The sensors, overwhelmed by the sudden storm, couldn't keep up with the data fast enough. Water began to pool in the lower areas of the fields, flooding parts of the crops. Jake's stomach sank. He watched helplessly as the machines whirred and beeped in frantic disarray, failing to fix the damage they had caused. In a panic, Jake turned and ran out into the field, his boots sinking into the wet soil. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand by and watch everything he'd worked for go to waste. By the time he reached the flooded areas, it was already too late. The water had done its damage. Crops that had been doing so well were now drowning, their delicate roots suffocating under the weight of the water. Jake's heart twisted in his chest as he knelt beside the damaged plants, his hands running through the mud as if he could somehow undo the destruction. In the distance, he saw Emily and Sarah rushing toward him, their faces filled with concern. When they reached him, Sarah spoke first, her voice strained with worry. "Jake, the system, it was supposed to handle this," she said, holding out the tablet that was connected to the irrigation system. "We've never seen it fail like this before." Jake looked up at her, his face tight with frustration. "It's not about the system failing. It's about me letting it take control of everything. I should have known better than to trust it so much. I let it take the heart out of this farm." Emily crouched beside him, placing a hand on his back. "Jake, it wasn't your fault. We knew it was a risk, nothing's perfect. But we can fix this. We'll get the water levels under control. We'll repair the damage." Jake shook his head, standing up and brushing the dirt off his hands. "It's not just about fixing it. It's about the fact that I relied too much on the technology and ignored what I knew. I should have been out here, monitoring the storm, making sure the crops were okay. I can't just be the guy who turns everything over to machines. That's not who I am." There was a long silence as Emily and Sarah exchanged glances. Sarah stepped forward cautiously, her voice softer now. "Jake, you don't have to give up on the technology. We've made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we can't learn from it. We can make the system smarter. We can integrate more fail-safes. This is part of the process. We all learn, and we adapt." Jake's gaze hardened. "Maybe it's time I stop adapting to everything around me and start trusting myself again." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "You're right. We need to trust our instincts, too. But we also need to remember that the world is changing. And we can use technology to help us. We just need to find a balance." Jake felt the weight of her words settling in, but it didn't feel like an easy solution. The damage to the crops wasn't just a technical failure, it was a wake-up call. He had been so focused on making everything work perfectly that he had neglected the one thing that truly mattered, his own connection to the land. After hours of work, the storm had passed, and the farm was finally starting to return to some semblance of normal. The floodwaters receded, and Jake and his team worked tirelessly to save what they could. The experience left him exhausted but strangely clearer in his resolve. The future of farming wasn't just about machines or technology. It was about striking a balance between tradition and progress, a balance he hadn't found yet, but one he knew he had to. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the skies cleared, Jake stood at the edge of the field, looking out at the crops that had weathered the storm. The damage was significant, but the resilience of the land still shone through. It was a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, the farm had a way of bouncing back. Emily joined him, her steps quiet behind him. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Jake nodded, his gaze still on the fields. "I think I'm starting to understand. It's not about rejecting progress or holding on to the past. It's about learning how to work together. We can't ignore one for the other. It's the only way we'll get through this." Emily smiled softly. "I think that's the first step toward finding that balance." Jake turned to her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah. It's just going to take some time. As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows over the fields, Jake realized something. It wasn't about trying to control everything or trying to hold on to the past. It was about moving forward, with all the tools he had at his disposal, whether they were old or new, and finding a way to make them work together. He wasn't ready to fully embrace the future yet, but he was starting to see that he didn't have to do it alone. The road ahead was still unclear, but for the first time in a while, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days that followed the storm were long and challenging. The damage to the crops was extensive, and Jake threw himself into the recovery efforts, working alongside Emily, Sarah, and the rest of the team. But something had shifted in him, something subtle yet important. The storm had shaken him, yes, but it had also reminded him of the importance of his own instincts. The technology, as advanced as it was, could not replace the farmer's eye, the one that had spent years understanding the land, feeling its rhythm, and sensing when something was wrong. Even with that realization, Jake couldn't ignore the fact that technology had its place. The drones and automated systems had helped him save time and reduce water waste, and he knew that if they could iron out the kinks, they could help him in the future. But he wasn't going to rely solely on them anymore. He had to find a way to use both, his own knowledge and the technology, without letting one outweigh the other. By midweek, the farm was showing signs of recovery. The irrigation system had been recalibrated, and a crew was working on draining the excess water from the flooded fields. Despite the setback, Jake knew they had to keep moving forward. They couldn't afford to let the storm be their undoing. He was in the barn when Emily came to find him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Jake," she said, taking a step closer. "We've got a new update from Sarah and the tech team. They've been working on some improvements to the system. They think they've solved the issues we had during the storm." Jake looked up from where he had been inspecting a broken irrigation valve. "How so?" "Well," Emily began, "they've added additional sensors that will help predict weather changes even more accurately. The system will now adjust the irrigation settings before the rain even hits. It should be able to keep up with the changes, even in extreme conditions." Jake sighed, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "I want to believe it, Emily. I really do. But I'm not sure I'm ready to let go of the old ways completely." She smiled gently, understanding. "I get that. But think about it this way, if we keep improving the technology and use it alongside the knowledge we already have, we could make this farm stronger than it's ever been. You don't have to let go of everything you've known. We're just adding to it, making it better." Jake looked at her, trying to weigh her words. She was right, of course. He couldn't keep fighting change forever. But how could he reconcile the traditions he held dear with the unrelenting march of progress? That evening, Jake found himself walking through the fields alone. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over the land. The air was cool and fresh, and the fields, though scarred by the storm, seemed to be recovering with every passing hour. He paused at a small grove of trees on the edge of the property, taking in the peaceful sight. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the sounds of nature wash over him. He remembered when he was younger, how he would spend hours here with his father, learning the ins and outs of the land. His father had always trusted his instincts, and it was those lessons that had shaped Jake into the farmer he was today. His thoughts were interrupted by the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see Emily, who had come to join him. She smiled warmly as she walked up beside him. "You're lost in thought," she said, her voice gentle. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, I guess I am. Just thinking about everything. I can't shake the feeling that we're on the edge of something big, but I don't know if I'm ready for it." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know it's a lot, Jake. But sometimes, change isn't something we control. It's just something we have to grow with. The farm's been here for generations. And it will keep being here for generations more, no matter how we move forward. Jake looked out at the fields once more, his mind racing with the possibilities. He had always believed in the land, in the cycles of nature, in the rhythms of the seasons. But now, it felt like the world was shifting beneath his feet. Could he balance both the old and the new? Could he preserve what he had always known while embracing the future? Emily stood quietly beside him, giving him the space he needed to think. After a few moments, Jake took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing. "I'm not sure how we do it, Emily. But I know one thing. I'm not ready to give up on this farm. I'll figure out how to make it work, how to use everything we have, the old and the new. I just have to take it one step at a time." She smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "That's all any of us can do." The next few weeks saw the farm slowly but steadily returning to its rhythm. The technology was fully integrated into their operations now, but Jake had made it clear to everyone that he wasn't going to let it take over. He worked alongside the systems, using them as tools to help him manage the land, but he was always present, monitoring the fields, listening to the wind, and reading the soil. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. The crop yield, though slightly reduced due to the storm, was showing promising signs of recovery. And with the new upgrades to the irrigation system, Jake found himself more confident in the farm's future. Still, there was a sense of hesitation deep inside him. The balance wasn't easy to find, and every day felt like a small victory or a potential setback. One evening, as Jake sat on the porch after a long day, a familiar vehicle pulled up to the farm gate. It was Elon Musk, the man who had been instrumental in introducing the technology that had so drastically changed the farm. Jake stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans as Elon approached, a casual smile on his face. "Jake," Elon greeted, extending a hand. "How are things going?" Jake shook his hand firmly, a mixture of appreciation and frustration in his eyes. "Better than before, I guess. We've had a few hiccups, but we're making it work. The system's been upgraded, and it's helping, but I'm still figuring out how to find the right balance between tech and tradition." Elon nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a process. It always is. But I believe you're on the right track. This farm, with its history and your knowledge, combined with the technology, could become a model for the future of farming." Jake looked out at the fields, his gaze distant. "I hope so. I just need to make sure I'm doing right by it, by the land and the people who've worked it for generations." Elon smiled knowingly. "I think you're already doing that. It's not about perfection, Jake. It's about progress. And you're making it happen, one step at a time." As the evening settled in, Jake felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. There was still a long road ahead, but he wasn't walking it alone. He had his team, his family, and his instincts. And now, he had the tools to help him navigate the changing world of farming. The road to recovery wasn't easy, but it was a road he was willing to travel. It was a crisp morning when the unexpected visitor arrived. Jake was up before the sun, his boots already worn from a week of relentless work. The fields were in recovery mode, the irrigation system running smoothly now that the worst of the storm's aftermath had passed. The crops that had survived were slowly regaining strength, but there was still much to do. Jake spent most of his mornings inspecting the land, making sure everything was on track, but that morning, something felt different. As he walked down the dirt road leading from the barn to the edge of the fields, he noticed a car parked near the gate. It was an unfamiliar vehicle, a sleek, black electric car, its exterior gleaming in the early morning light. Jake squinted against the bright sun as he approached, his steps slow and cautious. The car's engine was off, and the door was slightly ajar. As Jake drew closer, he saw a man standing by the vehicle, surveying the land with an air of familiarity, yet there was something about him that felt out of place. The man had a sharp, calculating look in his eyes, his face almost too polished for someone who'd be out in the middle of nowhere. "Can I help you?" Jake asked, raising an eyebrow as he approached the stranger. The man turned, his expression shifting into a pleasant, though somewhat smug, smile. "Jake, I presume?" he asked, his voice smooth and confident. "Yeah, that's me," Jake replied, his tone guarded. "Who are you?" The man extended a hand. "My name's Alex Walker. I'm with SolarX Innovations." Jake shook the man's hand, unsure of what to make of him. "SolarX? Never heard of it." Alex chuckled softly, as if Jake's ignorance was amusing. "We're a company focused on sustainable energy solutions. I've been following the work you've been doing with technology on the farm, and I think we might be able to help." Jake folded his arms, taking a step back. "Help with what, exactly?" "Well," Alex continued, "it's clear you've been incorporating new tech into your farming operations. But from what I've seen, there's a lot more potential. We specialize in solar-powered systems for agriculture. The future of farming is going to be about renewable energy. I think your farm could benefit from our expertise." Jake was skeptical, to say the least. "I'm not sure we need any more expertise. We're managing just fine." Alex's smile never wavered. "Oh, I'm sure you are. But imagine if you could reduce your energy costs and even become energy independent. We've got systems that can integrate with your existing setup and make your farm more efficient. You'd have power without relying on the grid." Jake scratched his chin, considering the offer. It wasn't the worst idea. Solar energy could help with some of the energy costs around the farm, especially with the automated systems running constantly. Still, something didn't sit right with him. He wasn't someone who easily bought into new ideas, especially ones that seemed too good to be true. "So, what's the catch?" Jake asked, eyeing him warily. Alex's smile faltered for a moment, but only for a split second before he recovered. "No catch. We're offering you a partnership. We'll provide the technology, install the systems, and manage the setup. In exchange, we'd like to help you showcase the potential of renewable energy in agriculture. Think of it as a win-win." Jake wasn't convinced. "I don't know, man. We've got enough on our plate right now. We're still figuring out how to balance the tech we've already got with the way we've always done things. Adding more might be too much." Alex's eyes gleamed, his voice lowering slightly. "I understand the hesitation. But think about it this way, by integrating solar power, you'll have more control over your farm's future. It'll reduce your reliance on outside sources. And the publicity from a partnership like this could do wonders for your business." There was a moment of silence as Jake weighed the pros and cons. On one hand, the idea of cutting energy costs and having more control over his farm's power was appealing. But on the other, he couldn't help but feel like Alex had an agenda, something beyond simply helping. "How much does something like this cost?" Jake finally asked, his tone a little softer but still cautious. "Not as much as you might think," Alex said smoothly. "We've worked with farms of all sizes. Our systems are scalable. We offer financing options, and over time, the energy savings will pay for the system. It's a smart investment for the future." Jake looked at him for a moment longer, still unsure. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "But I'm not making any decisions today." Alex nodded, unfazed. "Of course. I understand. I'll leave my contact info with you. When you're ready, just give me a call." With that, Alex turned and headed back to his car. Jake stood there for a moment, watching him leave, feeling a growing sense of unease. Solar energy. It wasn't a bad idea in theory. But Jake wasn't sure if this was the right time to jump into something new. He wasn't convinced that adding another layer of technology was the answer to all his problems. As the car disappeared down the road, Jake turned back toward the fields. The sun was higher now, and the light hit the crops in such a way that they almost looked like they were glowing. He felt a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. The farm was still recovering, and there were so many unknowns in front of him. Could he really afford to add more complexity to an already fragile situation? Or was this the solution they'd been looking for? Jake didn't know the answer, not yet. But as the day wore on and he returned to his work, his mind kept circling back to that conversation with Alex. Solar power, renewable energy, what if that was the missing piece? What if it could make everything more efficient? Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Alex wasn't telling him. And as much as Jake wanted to be open to new ideas, he had learned long ago to trust his gut. Later that afternoon, Emily found Jake in the barn, tinkering with some of the irrigation components. "So, who was the guy at the gate this morning?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Jake looked up from what he was doing, giving her a tired smile. "His name's Alex Walker. He's from a company that does solar energy for farms. He thinks we could benefit from their systems." Emily's eyebrows shot up. "Solar energy? That's a big jump." "Yeah, that's what I said," Jake replied, leaning against the counter. "I don't know, it could be useful, but I'm not sure it's the right time. Plus, there's something about him I don't trust." Emily was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I get it. But maybe we should at least look into it. If nothing else, we'll know what we're dealing with." Jake thought about that for a second. "I'll think about it. But I'm not committing to anything just yet." Emily smiled, her voice reassuring. "That's all I'm asking. Just take your time." Jake watched her leave, his mind swirling with possibilities. Was this the next step? Or was he getting in over his head? The road ahead felt uncertain, and with each decision, Jake knew the future of the farm was hanging in the balance. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following days were filled with mixed emotions for Jake. Every morning, he woke up early, like always, but this time, his mind wasn't just on the crops or the irrigation system, it was on the conversation he had with Alex Walker. He couldn't shake the idea of solar energy. Jake had always been a man of tradition, but as he looked around the farm, at the rising costs, the unpredictable weather patterns, and the growing influence of technology in his industry, it began to make more sense. Still, he wasn't ready to jump in without a clear picture of what he was getting into. Emily had encouraged him to at least look into it, and after some internal deliberation, Jake decided to take the next step. He called Alex that afternoon. "Jake." Alex answered on the second ring, his voice full of enthusiasm. "Glad to hear from you. Have you had some time to think it over?" Jake leaned back against the old barn, the sunlight casting a golden glow over the fields. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I'd like to get more details, maybe we can set up a meeting. I don't know if I'm ready to commit to anything, but I'm open to hearing you out." "Of course," Alex replied quickly. "How about we come out to the farm next week? I'll bring the team, and we'll do a full assessment. We'll show you exactly what we're thinking. No pressure, I promise." Jake hesitated for a moment. "All right. Let's do it. But I'm not signing anything today, got it?" "No worries, Jake. I respect that. We'll take it slow." Alex's voice was smooth, almost too smooth, but Jake wasn't about to back out now. This was his chance to get the full picture. The week dragged on, and with each passing day, Jake became more introspective. He found himself looking at the solar panels on his neighbor's roof and wondering if that was the direction he should be heading. It wasn't just about the farm anymore, it was about the future of farming itself. Every major decision Jake had made in his career had been based on experience, gut instinct, and understanding the land. But technology was changing everything, and for once, Jake wasn't sure what was best. Emily noticed the change in him. She'd been working just as hard as he had, ensuring that the crops were properly irrigated and tended to. She could tell he was on edge, his usual calm demeanor replaced with an undercurrent of doubt. "You're awfully quiet today," she remarked one afternoon, as they worked side by side in the fields. "What's on your mind?" Jake glanced at her and then back to the rows of plants. "I've been thinking about Alex Walker, the guy from SolarX." "Ah," Emily said, nodding. "I figured as much. What do you think?" "I don't know," Jake muttered. "It's just, a lot. The idea of adding solar power to the farm seems promising, but I'm not sure if it's the right fit. We're already balancing so many new things, and I'm not sure I want to make another big change right now. Maybe it's too soon." Emily tilted her head, considering his words. "I get it. But look at everything you've already done, adding the drones, the irrigation system, all of that. You're making progress. And you've always said you wanted to be ahead of the curve, right?" Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I've said that. But every step forward seems to come with more complications. I feel like I'm constantly adjusting to something new." "Maybe it's just the way forward, Jake," Emily said softly. "This farm is going to evolve. You can't stop it. But that doesn't mean you have to give up what's important to you, your connection to the land, the traditions. You can combine the best of both worlds." Jake smiled faintly. "I hope you're right." The day of the meeting with SolarX arrived faster than Jake had anticipated. It was a cool morning when Alex and his team pulled up to the farm, a caravan of sleek vehicles and portable equipment. Jake stood by the barn, watching as they unloaded the gear. He felt a sense of hesitation rising within him, but there was no turning back now. He had to see what they were offering before making any decisions. Alex was the first to approach, his hand extended. "Jake, great to see you. We're excited to show you what we've got." Jake shook his hand but was mindful of his own hesitation. "All right. Let's see it." The SolarX team began setting up their equipment, unloading large panels and solar arrays. They started by explaining the specifics of how solar energy could integrate with the farm's existing systems. They showed Jake how they could tie in with the automated irrigation system, potentially cutting down energy costs and providing backup power in case of a failure. But as the team talked, Jake found himself zoning out. He appreciated the tech. They were offering a way to become more energy independent, to increase sustainability, and even reduce operational costs in the long term. It wasn't a bad deal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Alex's polished pitch and enthusiasm made him feel like he was being sold a dream. He wasn't sure if it was a dream he wanted to buy into. At one point, Emily came up beside him, noticing the uncertainty in his eyes. "What's going through your head?" she asked quietly. Jake looked at her, his expression conflicted. "It sounds good, Emily. It really does. But I don't know if it's the right fit. I keep wondering, am I doing this for the farm, or am I just buying into something because it sounds like the future?" Emily gave him a knowing look. "You don't have to jump in today. You don't have to rush anything. You've always trusted your gut, Jake. Trust it now." Jake nodded, grateful for her support. It wasn't about the tech anymore. It was about his intuition, the same gut feeling that had guided him through every storm, every setback, every difficult decision. As the meeting continued, Jake remained quiet, listening more than speaking. He let Alex do the talking, trying to pick up on the details that might help him make his decision. But the more he heard, the less certain he became. There were too many uncertainties, too many things that didn't sit well with him. By the end of the meeting, Alex was eager for Jake to commit. "We can have everything set up in a matter of weeks, Jake. We're ready to move forward whenever you are." Jake shook his head, his decision clear in his mind. "I need more time to think about it. I'm not making any decisions today." Alex's smile faltered just slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Of course, Jake. Take your time. I'll leave you with the proposal." You can look it over when you're ready. As the SolarX team packed up and left, Jake stood silently for a moment, watching the sleek cars drive off. His mind was a swirl of thoughts, doubts, hopes, fears, and dreams. He knew that the farm was at a crossroads. Technology had already changed so much, but was it really the answer to every challenge? As he walked back toward the barn, Emily fell in step beside him. "Well?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't know," Jake replied, shaking his head. "I'm not sure what the next step is. But I know one thing for sure, I'm not going to let anyone rush me into anything." Emily smiled. "That's the Jake I know." Jake looked out across the fields, the sun beginning to set behind the horizon. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew that whatever path he chose, it had to be the right one for the farm, something that honored the past and embraced the future, without losing sight of the land that had always sustained them. The decision to move forward, or not, lingered heavily on Jake's mind. After the SolarX team's visit, he found himself restless, unable to shake the nagging thoughts about the future of his farm. Emily had been patient, offering her thoughts and advice, but she knew her husband well enough to give him the space he needed to think things through. She wasn't about to push him into a decision he wasn't ready to make. Still, the unease was undeniable. The weather had changed in the past few days. A cold front had rolled in, chilling the morning air, and the ground was hardening with the coming of fall. Jake stood at the edge of his field one morning, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn jacket, watching the frost glisten on the crops. His mind wasn't on the soil or the harvest, it was on the path that lay ahead. He had spent hours looking over the proposal from Alex Walker and SolarX, but each time, the numbers didn't add up. He had a lot of reservations about the long-term costs and whether the farm could afford such an investment. Even more troubling was the suspicion that lingered, like an itch he couldn't scratch. What was Alex really after? Was it simply about solar power and efficiency, or was there something more? The worst part was that Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his farm was being used as a stepping stone. After all, SolarX had made it clear that they were interested in more than just him, they were looking to make a name for themselves in the agricultural sector. He had heard the stories of big tech companies pushing out small farms, using them for publicity and profit. Was he falling into that trap? The sound of a truck pulling up behind him broke his thoughts. He turned to find Emily's truck parked next to the gate, the engine still running. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, stepping out and walking toward him. Jake nodded slowly but didn't immediately answer. He couldn't shake the thoughts in his head. He looked at the truck for a moment, then met Emily's gaze. "I don't know, Em. I just don't feel right about this. The more I think about it, the more I feel like I'm about to make a huge mistake." Emily crossed her arms, standing beside him and looking out at the land. She knew him too well to push him too hard. "It's not an easy decision. You've always taken your time with things like this." Jake exhaled, the frustration mounting. "I'm not just worried about the tech, though. I'm worried about what this whole thing means for us. If I bring something like this on board, am I selling out? Am I giving up everything I've worked for, just to play along with some corporate idea of what farming should be?" Emily softened, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "You're not selling out, Jake. You're just considering another way to keep the farm running, that's all. It doesn't mean you're abandoning what you believe in. If anything, it could give you the chance to preserve it for longer, to keep the farm in the family for generations to come." Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He had always been about keeping the family legacy alive, ensuring that the farm remained a testament to hard work and perseverance. The thought of losing that to corporate interests, of letting the very thing that made the farm special slip through his fingers, he couldn't stomach it. But then there was the question, could the farm survive without it? Could they continue on with the same methods, facing increasing costs, unpredictable weather, and pressure from larger agribusinesses, while technology passed them by? "Maybe it's not about selling out," Jake muttered under his breath. Maybe it's about survival. Emily took his hand, squeezing it gently. Exactly. You're not just trying to keep the farm alive, you're trying to make sure it thrives. That's not a bad thing, Jake. If you're not open to change, you'll be left behind. But that doesn't mean you have to compromise everything you believe in. Jake let her words settle in, the doubt slowly melting away, replaced by a clarity he hadn't expected. He didn't have to accept everything Alex had pitched. He could choose what worked for him and the farm. Maybe there was a way to blend tradition with innovation. But first, he needed to do more research. He needed to find out if solar energy was truly the right choice, or if it was just a trend that could bring more problems than solutions. That night, Jake stayed up later than usual, scrolling through his laptop and researching everything he could find about solar-powered farming. He read case studies from other farmers, both successes and failures. He scoured forums and blogs, looking for any insight into the real-world impact of solar panels on farms like his. The more he read, the more the picture became clearer. There were farmers who had seen their energy bills drop significantly, who were able to weather power outages, and who even made money by selling excess energy back to the grid. But then, there were also stories of projects that had failed due to poorly planned installations, unanticipated maintenance costs, and unreliable technology. After hours of research, Jake leaned back in his chair, feeling exhausted but somehow more confident. He wasn't ready to make a final decision, but he had learned enough to ask the right questions. He needed more answers from SolarX, not just the promises of savings and energy independence, but hard facts, details about their long-term service, and what kind of support they offered once the systems were up and running. Jake made a mental note to call Alex the next morning. If he wanted to take the next step, it had to be on his terms. He wouldn't let anyone push him into a decision. The farm was his life, and he would protect it at all costs. The next day, after a long morning in the fields, Jake called Alex. He'd been putting it off, but he knew it was time. "Hello, Jake," Alex answered, sounding chipper as always. "I trust you've had some time to think things over." Jake took a deep breath. "Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I've got some questions for you about your proposal. I want to know about long-term support, maintenance costs, and any risks I might not be aware of. I've been reading about solar systems, and I need more information before I make any decisions." Alex's tone shifted slightly, but he remained professional. "Of course. I'm happy to go over everything with you. We'll make sure you have all the details you need." Jake felt a small sense of relief. This was the first step, asking the right questions. He wasn't going to let Alex pull him into something without fully understanding what was at stake. As the conversation continued, Jake felt a spark of hope. There was a chance, maybe a small one, but still a chance, that this could work. He wasn't ready to say yes, but for the first time in days, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. The days following Jake's conversation with Alex Walker were a mixture of anticipation and doubt. While the call had given him a sense of control, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that still clung to him. He had asked the right questions, but he knew that the answers he received weren't the whole story. He didn't want to be taken in by a glossy sales pitch, he needed real, practical information. The farm was still thriving in its own way, but the future of it hung in a delicate balance. It wasn't just the crops or the weather Jake was concerned about anymore, it was how the world around him was changing, and whether he could change with it. The thought of moving forward with solar energy was becoming harder to ignore, but the fear of the unknown lingered at the edges of his mind. Jake spent more time in the field than ever before, walking the rows of crops, hands buried deep in his pockets, contemplating. It was a ritual he had done 1,000 times, but today, it felt different. It wasn't just about checking the soil or counting the number of pests that had gotten into the corn, it was about the future of the farm, his legacy. The land had always been reliable. But now, he was beginning to feel like the old methods he'd relied on for years might not be enough. That evening, Emily found him in the barn, examining the equipment for their irrigation system. She could tell something was weighing on him. It wasn't just the usual exhaustion after a long day, it was something more. "You're quiet tonight," she said, stepping into the dimly lit barn. "I thought you'd be ready to relax after the long day." Jake didn't look up immediately. He fiddled with a valve for a few moments, his mind clearly elsewhere. "I've been thinking about everything. About the farm, about what's next." Emily took a few steps forward, her boots crunching on the gravel floor. "You've been doing a lot of thinking, I can tell. But you've always been a man of action, Jake. So, what are you thinking about?" Jake let out a long breath, his eyes finally meeting hers. "I'm thinking about whether this solar thing is the right move. If I can afford it, if it'll work the way they say it will. And if I do go forward with it, what will I lose in the process?" Emily crossed her arms, looking him over carefully. She could sense the internal struggle inside him. "I can't answer all of those questions for you. But you know what I've always said, you've always trusted your gut. And you've always fought for what's best for this farm. If solar energy can make things easier in the long run, why not explore it?" Jake rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "That's what Alex says too. He talks about all the savings, the energy independence. But I'm worried that it's just another way for them to profit off of us, that we're just a stepping stone in their bigger plan. I don't want to be a part of something that's going to end up pushing people like me out." Emily's gaze softened. "You've been approached by corporations before. You've made your decisions based on your values, not just profit. If there's a way this could work for us, we'll figure it out. You just need to take your time." Jake nodded slowly, grateful for her steady support. He didn't know how much time he had left to make the decision, but Emily was right, rushing into something out of fear or doubt wasn't the way forward. He needed to understand the full picture before he could act. The next morning, Jake called Alex again, this time with a few more questions. "I've been looking through the proposal again, Alex, and I need more specifics," Jake said, his voice more direct than before. "You mentioned energy independence, but I need to know how that works in the long run. What's the guarantee that this system will continue to perform as promised?" Alex, as expected, was quick to respond. "Jake, I completely understand your concerns. Our systems are designed to last for decades, with very minimal maintenance. We offer a comprehensive service package that includes maintenance, troubleshooting, and regular check-ins to ensure everything is running smoothly. Plus, we have a 25-year warranty on the panels and equipment." Jake absorbed the information, but still, something nagged at him. What happens if we run into unforeseen issues? If the technology doesn't work the way you say, what's the backup plan? Alex's tone became more reassuring. "We've been in this business for years, Jake, and we stand behind our products. If something goes wrong, we'll be there to fix it. And the warranty covers most of the potential issues that might arise. Our job is to make sure that the system integrates smoothly with your operations." Jake rubbed his forehead, the weight of the decision sinking deeper. "All right, I'll take a look at everything again. But I'm not making any promises yet. I need to be absolutely sure before I make any commitments." "No problem, Jake," Alex said, his voice calm. "Take all the time you need. We're here when you're ready." Jake spent the next few days diving deeper into the technical side of solar energy. He reached out to other farmers who had worked with SolarX and other companies, trying to get a more honest, unfiltered perspective on the reality of using solar power on a farm. Some spoke highly of the benefits, praising how their energy costs had dropped and how they had gained greater independence from the power grid. Others, however, expressed frustration at the unexpected costs and technical issues they had faced over the years. As the days passed, Jake found himself growing more confused than ever. On one hand, there were clear advantages to solar energy: the cost savings, the potential for energy independence, the sustainability. On the other hand, He was afraid of making the wrong choice, of committing to something that could have long-term consequences he wasn't prepared to deal with. Emily watched him go through the motions, noting his deepening uncertainty. "Jake, you're spinning in circles," she remarked one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen. "At this point, you're just collecting opinions from everyone but yourself. What do you really want?" Jake sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I don't know, Em. I'm not sure what's best anymore. It feels like I'm stuck between tradition and progress, and I'm not sure I can have both." Emily stepped closer, her voice steady. "Maybe you don't need to have both right now. Maybe you need to take one step at a time. You've never let fear stop you before. Trust your instincts." Jake looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. She was right. He had spent years working through challenges and finding solutions. Now, it was time to trust himself to make the right choice, no matter how uncertain the future seemed. As the sun began to set that evening, Jake stood outside, looking out over the fields, the wind rustling the leaves of the trees. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of peace. He didn't have all the answers, but he was no longer paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong decision. It wasn't about solar energy, or technology, or even what Alex Walker had pitched. It was about doing what was right for the farm, what was right for his farm. Tomorrow, Jake would make a choice. And no matter what it was, he would face it with the same determination that had guided him through every storm before. The days leading up to Jake's final decision were filled with moments of contemplation, self-doubt, and quiet reflection. The fall harvest was nearing, and the crops were beginning to show the results of his hard work, but Jake's mind was still preoccupied with the question of solar energy. He had spent hours reviewing the proposal, speaking with other farmers, and considering every angle. The uncertainty was still there, gnawing at him, but the one thing he had learned over the years was that there was no such thing as a perfect decision. There would always be risks, but there was also the potential for something greater. Something that could ensure the future of the farm and keep the land thriving for years to come. Emily could see the change in him, even before he spoke up. She had been watching him closely, knowing how deeply he felt about the farm and the responsibility he carried for its future. The quiet moments of reflection had become more frequent, and she knew that he was reaching a breaking point, a moment where he would need to decide once and for all whether to take the leap into the unknown or stay within the confines of tradition. On a crisp morning, with the light filtering softly through the trees, Jake stood in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee in his hands. The sun was just rising, casting a golden glow across the land. Emily stood by the window, glancing at him as she prepared breakfast. There was a quietness in the air that spoke volumes about the weight of the decision ahead. "You've been awfully quiet this morning," Emily said, her voice light but laced with concern. "Are you ready to make your decision?" Jake took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the warm mug. He had thought about it for days, about all the pros and cons, the risks, the rewards. He had even spoken with the team at SolarX once more, addressing every lingering doubt and question he had. And yet, the decision still didn't feel easy. "I think I am," Jake replied, his voice thoughtful. "I've looked at everything, Em. All the facts, the stories from other farmers. I've even considered walking away from it completely. But something about it keeps calling me back. It's not just about the savings or the energy independence, it's about preserving the farm for the future. I don't want to see it fall behind just because I'm afraid of change." Emily smiled softly, walking over to him and placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've always had that drive, Jake. You're not one to shy away from a challenge. But it's also okay to feel uncertain. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that lead us to the greatest rewards." Jake nodded, looking out the window at the sprawling fields before him. "Yeah. But it's not just about me anymore. It's about all of us, our family, the future generations. If I make this decision, I'm not just betting on solar energy. I'm betting on the future of farming itself." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Emily felt the gravity of the moment. She knew he was right. The world was changing, and they could either embrace it or be left behind. She trusted Jake's judgment, even if he still wrestled with doubt. "Well," Emily said, her voice steady and sure, "whatever you decide, I'll stand by you. And we'll figure it out together, like we always do." Jake looked at her, a quiet sense of gratitude washing over him. She was right. They had faced challenges before, hard times, good times, and everything in between. And they had always come through, side by side. This decision would be no different. That afternoon, Jake called Alex Walker once again. This time, his voice was resolute. "Alex," Jake began, "I've made my decision. I'm ready to move forward with the solar project. But there are still a few things I need clarified before we sign anything." Alex's voice brightened immediately. "That's great to hear, Jake. We've been looking forward to working with you. I'll make sure everything is set up for you and your farm." Jake paused for a moment, making sure he had all his questions lined up. "Before we go any further, I need to know the exact details of the installation process, how long it'll take, what the disruptions will be, and exactly what kind of support I can expect once everything is in place. I need to be confident that this will integrate smoothly with the operations we already have." Alex assured him that all of that information would be provided, and they scheduled a meeting to go over the final details. Jake wasn't going to rush this, he needed to understand every step before making the leap. But deep down, he felt a sense of relief. The decision had been made, and now he could begin moving forward. Over the next week, the SolarX team arrived to begin preparations for the installation. There was a buzz of activity around the farm as they began laying the groundwork for the solar panels. Workers arrived early each morning, digging trenches and setting up the infrastructure needed to support the new system. Jake had been expecting a significant disruption, but the team worked efficiently, and he was pleasantly surprised at how quickly they managed to get everything in place. During this time, Jake and Emily continued their daily routines, harvesting, maintaining the farm, and checking in with the crew to ensure the project was proceeding as planned. There were moments of doubt, but they were fleeting. Each time he saw the progress being made, Jake's confidence grew. This could work. He could already imagine the long-term benefits: lower energy costs, more reliable power during outages, and a more sustainable farming operation. One afternoon, as the crew worked on installing the final panels, Jake stood by the field, looking at the new technology being integrated into his farm. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of pride. This wasn't just about keeping up with the times, it was about shaping the future. Emily joined him, standing at his side, and together they watched the workers finish up the last steps of the installation. "It's happening, isn't it?" Emily asked, her voice filled with quiet awe. Jake nodded, his gaze steady. "Yeah. It is." As the project neared completion, Jake knew that there was still a long road ahead. The solar panels would need to be tested, and there would be adjustments to make, but he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The future of the farm was no longer just an uncertain question, it was taking shape, one panel at a time. The first spark of the system flickered to life a few weeks later, and Jake stood there, watching as the lights flickered on across the farm. The first step into the future had been taken. Jake and Emily exchanged a look, and for the first time in a long while, they both knew that they had made the right choice. The weeks following the completion of the solar installation were a mix of progress and learning curves. Jake had felt a sense of accomplishment when the system first powered on, but the true test had only just begun. He spent his days observing the way the farm ran with the new solar energy system integrated, checking the meters, making sure everything was working as it should. The reality of the change had set in, and he was anxious to see if the anticipated results would come to fruition. But while there were moments of satisfaction, there were also doubts that crept in, uninvited. There had been some minor glitches with the system, a couple of panels had failed to charge optimally during overcast days, and a few of the inverters were acting up. These issues weren't uncommon with a new installation, but Jake couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was off. Jake had always prided himself on taking charge of every aspect of the farm, from the crops to the equipment to the long-term strategies that kept the land in good condition. But now, there was something intangible about the solar system that he couldn't quite grasp. He had trusted the experts at SolarX, and while they had been quick to respond to his questions and concerns, the small issues were becoming more frequent. One afternoon, he sat down with Emily in their kitchen, the table scattered with papers, receipts, bills, and the system's performance reports. It was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator and the wind outside the only sounds breaking the stillness. Emily, as always, could sense his restlessness. "Jake, what's bothering you? You've been quiet all day. Is it the solar system?" Jake leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping restlessly on the edge of the table. "It's not perfect, Em. It's working, yeah. But it's not the way I thought it would be. There are days when the panels don't charge enough, or the power grid still kicks in when we need it most. I keep feeling like we're not getting the full value of what we've invested." Emily crossed the room and sat down beside him, her hand reaching across the table to meet his. "You knew it wasn't going to be a smooth ride, right? It's a big change. A big risk. But you've always said that change isn't something you're afraid of. You're just figuring it out. It takes time." Jake exhaled deeply, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, but I don't know how long I can afford to wait, Emily. The harvest is coming in, and the last thing I want is for the farm to be in the red because of some faulty system that promised us the world." Emily squeezed his hand. "Look, I get it. You don't want to risk the future of the farm. But if anyone can fix this, it's you. You've always worked hard to make things better, even when it seemed impossible." Jake met her gaze, appreciating her unwavering belief in him. It was what had always kept him going. "I just need to get it right. For us. For the farm. If the system isn't working, I can't keep putting money into it and hoping things improve." The next day, Jake called SolarX, requesting a technician to come out and inspect the system. It had been several weeks since the installation, and although the team had been responsive at first, Jake needed a deeper dive into the issue. He needed to know exactly what was going wrong and whether there was anything they could do to fix it without breaking the bank. Alex Walker was understanding when Jake explained the situation. "We're committed to making sure you get the best performance possible, Jake. I'll send someone out to take a look. We'll get it sorted." Later that week, a technician arrived at the farm, a man named Steve, who had worked with SolarX for over a decade. He was calm and methodical as he checked the panels, inspected the inverters, and reviewed the farm's energy usage patterns. After a few hours of testing, Steve sat down with Jake and Emily in the barn to discuss the findings. "Well," Steve began, adjusting his glasses, "the panels themselves are fine. No issues there. The problem seems to be in the connection with your grid. It's causing the system to override the solar output more often than it should. Essentially, the inverters are too sensitive to fluctuations in grid demand, so it switches to the backup power before the system can fully charge or release energy when you need it." Jake's brow furrowed. "What does that mean exactly?" Steve took a moment to gather his thoughts. "It's a software issue. The system is designed to be smart enough to detect when the grid is under stress and to prioritize energy efficiency. But in your case, it's prioritizing the grid more than it should, causing unnecessary switching between the solar energy and the grid power." Emily looked at Jake, then back at Steve. "So, it's not a problem with the panels themselves, just the way they interact with the grid?" "Exactly," Steve confirmed. "We'll need to reprogram the inverters to be less sensitive to grid changes and allow the solar energy to be used more consistently. That should fix the problem." Jake sighed in relief, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. So, it's fixable? Steve nodded. Absolutely. It'll take a few days of work, but once we've made the adjustments, you should see a significant improvement in energy independence. Jake and Emily exchanged a look, both of them feeling a glimmer of hope that they hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't perfect yet, but there was a solution, and that made all the difference. The following week, Steve and the SolarX team returned to adjust the inverters and reprogram the system. It took longer than anticipated, but by the time they finished, Jake could already feel a difference. Over the next few days, he carefully monitored the energy output. The system ran more smoothly, with fewer interruptions, and Jake began to notice a steady decrease in the amount of power the farm was pulling from the grid. It wasn't just the system that was changing, it was Jake's confidence. The uncertainty that had plagued him for so long began to fade. With every passing day, the solar system performed more reliably, and Jake realized that the future of the farm was not just about what was working today, it was about what he could build for tomorrow. As the first heavy frost began to settle over the land, Jake stood out in the field once more, looking at the rows of crops that had been harvested and the solar panels that stood like silent sentinels in the distance. The farm was thriving. The changes were still new, but they were taking root. He knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face them. The fall harvest was in full swing, and the crisp air carried the sweet smell of freshly harvested crops. The farm, once buzzing with the labor of planting and cultivating, now hummed with the satisfying rhythm of reaping the rewards of months of hard work. It was a time of celebration and reflection, as Jake and Emily worked side by side, moving through the fields, gathering the bounty they had nurtured all year. But beneath the satisfaction of a good harvest, Jake couldn't shake the thoughts that lingered in his mind. The solar system was still not perfect, and as the farm's energy needs grew, so did his concern. He knew that the time was coming when they would have to make a choice. Over the last several weeks, the solar panels had begun to work more efficiently. The adjustments Steve made had certainly improved the system, but Jake had yet to fully embrace the idea of relying on it for every single need. There were days when the solar system's performance seemed like a blessing, and there were others when Jake felt it still wasn't enough. What if it failed him when the farm needed it most? What if a storm or an unexpected power outage left them without power at a critical time? As he moved across the fields with Emily, Jake couldn't help but look back at the barn where the solar panels stood, silent and steady. The decision about whether to continue investing in the system, expand it, or pull the plug entirely weighed heavily on his mind. Emily noticed the way Jake's brow furrowed as he looked out toward the barn. "You've been quiet again. What's on your mind?" Jake paused, looking out over the fields for a moment before turning to face her. "I keep thinking about the solar system. It's working better, sure, but I'm still not sure it's enough. I don't know if it's reliable enough to power everything we need. What happens if something breaks down during the winter when the weather's at its worst? I can't risk the farm being left in the dark, Em." Emily squeezed his hand, her eyes soft with understanding. "I know it's not perfect, Jake. But I also know you've put a lot of time and effort into this. And you've worked so hard to bring the farm into the future. If anyone can make this work, it's you." Jake smiled faintly at her support, but doubt still lingered in his chest. "I appreciate you saying that. But it's not just about me. It's about everything we've built. I can't afford to make the wrong choice." Alex arrived at the farm a few days later, walking confidently toward the barn where the panels stood. He greeted Jake and Emily with a friendly handshake before they sat down at the kitchen table to go over the next steps. "So, what's the verdict, Jake?" Alex asked, looking over the reports from the previous months. "I'm guessing you've got some questions about expanding the system." Jake ran his fingers through his hair, clearly feeling the weight of the decision. "Yeah. I'm thinking about going all in. But I want to be sure that we're not just throwing money at something that might still fail us down the line. If we expand the system, I need guarantees. I can't risk the farm being left in the dark during critical times. Alex nodded, understanding the gravity of Jake's concerns. I get it. Solar energy is a big leap, and it's not always an easy transition. But we've seen how much it's already helped you. If we expand the system, we'll increase your energy storage and make the system more adaptable. We'll also make sure there's redundancy in place so you're never left without power. Jake leaned forward, his hands clasped together tightly. Redundancy? What do you mean exactly? Alex's tone grew more serious. By adding more panels and batteries, we can build in fail-safes. That way, if one part of the system goes down or the weather causes issues, you won't lose power. The farm will stay operational, and you'll have backup options. You'll never be reliant on just one system or one piece of equipment. If we do this right, you'll be able to weather the worst storms, both literally and figuratively. Jake absorbed the information, weighing the possibilities. He had always been cautious about the farm's future, and this was a big decision. But hearing Alex lay out the plan in such clear terms gave him a renewed sense of confidence. I think I'm ready to move forward, Jake said, feeling the weight of the choice settling into his chest but also the spark of optimism. Let's expand the system. Let's make sure the farm is ready for anything. Alex smiled. Great decision, Jake. We'll get started right away. In the weeks that followed, the SolarX team returned to the farm, working quickly and efficiently to install the expanded system. New panels were placed, and additional batteries were added to provide greater energy storage. The crew worked through the colder months, even as the frost began to cover the fields, with the promise that the farm would be fully equipped for the next season. Jake felt a sense of satisfaction watching the work unfold. It wasn't just about the solar panels anymore. It was about taking control of his future. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but this was a step in the right direction. The first test came when a particularly cold front moved in, bringing snow and freezing rain to the area. The old backup systems would have struggled to keep up, but Jake watched as the solar system powered the farm seamlessly, even in the midst of the storm. The panels captured the brief moments of sunlight, while the batteries stored enough power to keep the farm running even when the weather turned dark. For the first time, Jake felt a real sense of peace. The system wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. It had transformed the way he thought about his farm's future. The energy independence he had once dreamed of was now a reality. A few weeks after the system was fully operational, Jake and Emily stood in the kitchen, watching the snow fall gently outside. The harvest was over, the solar system was running smoothly, and the farm was thriving. It was a moment of calm, a pause before the next season began. Jake turned to Emily, a soft smile tugging at his lips. You know, I think we've made it. We're not just surviving anymore. We're thriving. Emily smiled back, a quiet pride in her eyes. I knew you could do it. Jake looked out the window, the snow blanketing the fields in a serene, untouched layer. The future of the farm was no longer uncertain, it was secure. And for the first time in years, Jake felt truly hopeful about what was to come. Winter had settled over the farm, its presence undeniable as snow blanketed the fields, and the wind carried a chill that seemed to cut through everything. For most, it was a season of quiet and rest, but for Jake, it was the beginning of the most important phase of the year. After all, winter wasn't just about surviving the cold, it was about preparing for what was next. The new solar system had been performing better than ever, but the real test would come with the unpredictable nature of winter weather. The work was quieter now. The fields lay dormant, and the hustle of harvest had been replaced by the steady hum of the farm's infrastructure. The solar system continued to function smoothly, providing enough energy to keep things running as usual. Jake had made sure the farm was ready, stocking up on supplies and preparing for the unknown challenges the season might throw his way. But just as Jake was starting to feel confident, the first true test of the new solar system came, an unexpected storm. It wasn't a snowstorm, but a fierce mix of rain and sleet, followed by freezing temperatures. The weather was unpredictable, and soon the forecast indicated that the region could be in for more severe weather than anyone had anticipated. Jake and Emily were standing in the kitchen, looking out at the dark sky as the wind howled outside. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. "We've got to keep an eye on that," Jake said, his voice tense. "This storm could be bad. We've got power now, but if the system gets overloaded or the batteries fail, it could really set us back." Emily nodded, concern flashing in her eyes. "It's hard to predict how these storms will hit. Just last year, the town lost power for almost 2 days. We don't want to risk that again." Jake crossed to the living room and pulled out the farm's emergency plans, something he had made sure to update regularly in case of an unforeseen disaster. "We've got enough supplies to last a few days if things go south, but I'm going to double-check everything. Better safe than sorry." The storm arrived with little warning. Within hours, the farm was engulfed in the icy mix of rain and sleet. The sky turned a dark, ominous gray, and the wind picked up, howling as it whipped through the trees. Jake stood by the window, watching the storm intensify, the air thick with a sense of urgency. He could feel the tension creeping into his chest, knowing that this was the moment of truth. Emily came to stand beside him. "How's the system holding up?" Jake quickly glanced at the control panel that showed the solar system's current status. It was stable, for now. But there was no telling how long that would last. The storm was fierce, and Jake knew that if it continued like this, the system might struggle to keep up. "We'll just have to see," Jake replied, his voice strained. "But if the snow and sleet keep piling up, it could drain the battery reserves faster than we expect." Minutes turned into hours, and as the storm raged on, Jake couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. He spent most of the night monitoring the energy use, checking the battery levels, and adjusting settings. Emily stayed by his side, a quiet support in the face of his mounting worry. Then, as the storm reached its peak, the unthinkable happened: the power flickered. Jake's heart skipped a beat as the lights dimmed and the farm's backup generators roared to life. The solar system had failed to keep up with the demand. The grid was down, and Jake knew that this would be a long night. "Damn it," Jake muttered under his breath. "We should have prepared for this. We've got backup power, but this could last for days." Emily put a hand on his arm. "Jake, we're not going to get anywhere by worrying. We've planned for this. The backup generators are running. The farm won't be left in the dark." Jake tried to steady his breathing, realizing she was right. They had prepared for this. But that didn't mean it was easy to watch everything fall apart at the worst possible time. The storm lasted for 3 days, and Jake spent most of that time managing the backup power, ensuring that the farm's critical systems remained operational. The solar system, despite its advancements, wasn't enough to handle the onslaught of energy demand caused by the storm. The weather had simply been too much for it to handle. But as the storm finally began to pass and the skies cleared, Jake felt a sense of relief wash over him. The backup power had held up, and the farm had made it through the worst of it. The solar system, despite its shortcomings, had proved to be a vital component. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was an important one. Emily was standing beside him as he checked the energy report the next morning. "Well, at least we made it through," she said, her voice tired but filled with relief. Jake nodded, still feeling the weight of the storm's toll. "Yeah. But it's clear we need to do more. This system, it's not enough. We can't afford to have this happen again." They both stood there, watching the sun break through the clouds. Despite the storm's havoc, there was a renewed sense of purpose in Jake's heart. He knew now that they couldn't just rely on the solar system alone. The farm needed more than that: backup power, better storage solutions, and perhaps even a larger system to ensure they wouldn't be caught off guard again. The days following the storm were filled with reflection. Jake and Emily spent time discussing the farm's future and what needed to be done to ensure its sustainability. They called SolarX again, this time asking for a more comprehensive upgrade. If the solar system was going to be the backbone of the farm, it needed to be able to handle not just the typical demands, but the extreme circumstances as well. When Alex arrived at the farm to meet with Jake, they walked out to the solar panels together, the remnants of the storm still visible in the distant fields. Jake was ready to take the next step. "I think we need to increase our battery storage," Jake said, his voice firm. "We've got the panels, but they're not enough to keep us from relying on the grid when we need it most." The storm proved that. Alex nodded in agreement. "I understand. We'll start working on that upgrade right away. More batteries, a larger capacity, and better efficiency for those high-demand moments. We'll get it right this time." Jake looked over the farm, feeling the weight of the decision. He had always known that it wouldn't be easy, but now, he was more certain than ever that the future of the farm depended on this. It was time to build the farm of tomorrow, no matter how many storms it would take to get there. Spring was just around the corner, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose for Jake and Emily. The days were growing longer, and the frost on the fields was beginning to melt. While many people would have been celebrating the end of winter, Jake was already deep in thought, planning for the next phase of the farm's transformation. The storm had been a wake-up call, and now it was time to act. After the fierce winter storm had knocked out their solar system's efficiency, Jake had come to the conclusion that they needed a more resilient energy solution. They couldn't rely on just one method to power the farm, they needed a combination of renewable energy, backup systems, and more robust storage capacity. The farm was growing, and so were its energy needs. He and Emily had spent hours discussing options, reviewing reports, and meeting with experts. They knew the solar system had potential, but it needed to be optimized. Solar energy alone wouldn't cut it if they wanted to remain independent of the grid, especially when winter storms were becoming more frequent. Jake had reached out to Alex again, and the plan was set, a complete overhaul of the farm's energy system. More solar panels, expanded battery storage, and an updated power management system that would ensure energy efficiency even during the harshest weather. This wasn't just about staying off the grid anymore, it was about future-proofing the farm. The team from SolarX arrived at the farm bright and early on a crisp morning. The plan was clear: they would expand the solar array, install new battery units, and improve the overall energy management system. Jake stood in the yard with Alex, looking at the barn where the solar panels were still mounted. The system had been a good start, but now they needed more. "This upgrade is going to change everything," Alex said with enthusiasm as he reviewed the blueprints for the new system. "We'll be able to increase energy storage by a significant amount. The key is to balance the system so that it can handle both the daily needs and the unexpected spikes during storms or high-demand periods." Jake nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want to get caught in a situation like the last storm. We need more storage, more reliability, and backup systems that work seamlessly." "You'll have that," Alex assured him. "By combining both solar energy and backup storage, plus a more advanced power management system, you won't have to worry about failing power during critical times." As the crew worked tirelessly to install the new panels and batteries, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was the beginning of something bigger. This wasn't just about energy independence, it was about sustainability. It was about proving that with hard work and innovation, a farm could thrive in a world that was becoming more uncertain. Jake and Emily watched as the new solar panels were mounted, their sleek designs gleaming in the early spring sunlight. The old system had been a good starting point, but these new panels were more efficient, capable of collecting energy even on cloudy days. As the storage units were connected and tested, Jake could feel a weight lifting from his shoulders. The day they finally activated the new system, Jake stood in front of the control panel, his fingers hovering over the switches. It was a moment of truth. He turned the key and flipped the switch. Instantly, the panels hummed to life, and the entire system came online. A series of green lights blinked on, indicating that everything was functioning as it should. Here we go, Jake said, his voice low but filled with relief. Emily joined him by the panel, her hand resting on his arm. It's going to work, Jake. I know it will. Jake looked out across the farm, taking in the sight of the freshly upgraded system. I hope so. We've come this far, and there's no turning back now. With the new system fully operational, the next challenge was to test it under real-world conditions. Jake and Emily decided to take a week to see how the system handled the farm's daily operations, everything from the irrigation pumps to the barn's lighting to the farm equipment. They were eager to see whether the new energy setup could handle the demands of a busy farm without falling short. The first test came sooner than expected. A cold front moved in one evening, bringing unexpected rain and wind. Jake was on edge, watching the weather reports with growing concern. The system was designed to handle spikes, but how would it fare in a storm like this? The winds howled and the rain came down in sheets, but the new solar system held steady. The lights in the barn stayed on, the water pumps continued to work, and the backup storage ensured that power was still available even during the peak of the storm. Jake stood in the barn, watching the smooth operation with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The system was performing better than expected. As the storm passed and the clouds parted, the sun came out just in time for the system to gather even more energy. The solar panels, though designed for cloudy days, thrived in the sunlight. With the added storage, Jake knew the farm was more secure than ever before. Weeks passed, and the farm's energy needs continued to grow as the season progressed. The combination of solar power, increased storage capacity, and advanced energy management allowed Jake to focus on the farm's future instead of worrying about constant power issues. The system had been tested, and it had passed with flying colors. But Jake knew that the journey wasn't over. There was always more to be done. The world was changing, and with it, the needs of the farm. He and Emily had built something extraordinary, but the work was never truly finished. Sustainability required constant effort and innovation. One evening, after a long day of work, Jake sat down at the kitchen table with Emily. The sun had set, casting a warm glow over the fields as the stars began to twinkle in the sky. They sipped their coffee, taking a moment to reflect on the progress they had made. You know, Emily said softly, we've come a long way from that first solar panel you put up. You were so unsure about it back then. Jake smiled, his eyes thoughtful. Yeah, I wasn't sure it would work. But look at us now. It's not just about solar panels anymore. It's about building a future for the farm, for the family, for everyone who relies on this place. We're making a difference, Em. Emily reached across the table and took his hand. I always knew you could do it. I knew we could do it. Jake squeezed her hand, looking out at the farm, the glowing lights from the barn standing as a beacon of hope in the darkness. We're just getting started. It had been a few months since the new energy system had been fully implemented, and the farm was thriving in ways Jake had never imagined. The daily stresses of maintaining power, of wondering if the system would hold up under pressure, had begun to fade into the background. There were still challenges, of course, there always would be on a farm, but the solar panels, combined with the advanced energy storage and management system, had given them the foundation they needed to face the future with confidence. Jake stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the fields where the crops were beginning to sprout. The rows of young plants stretched out before him, a testament to the hard work that had been put in, not only by him but by his team and by Emily, who had become his rock. They had learned so much over the past few years, not just about farming but about resilience, innovation, and community. And now, Jake was beginning to see the ripple effect of their efforts. It wasn't just their farm that had benefited from the new energy system, it was the entire community. Jake had decided it was time to share their success with others. He had always been someone who believed in the power of community, and now he saw an opportunity to give back in a meaningful way. So, with Emily's support, they reached out to local farmers, offering to share their knowledge of renewable energy and the lessons they had learned. The town had been struggling with rising energy costs, and Jake knew that many of the farms around him were in similar situations. They needed solutions that were sustainable, not just for the environment but for their bottom line. At first, some of the farmers were skeptical. They'd heard about solar energy, of course, but many believed it was expensive and unproven. Jake had seen that resistance before. But instead of pushing too hard, he took a more personal approach, inviting farmers over for tours of the farm, showing them how the system worked, and explaining the long-term benefits. He showed them the figures, how much they had saved in energy costs, how they were now less dependent on the grid, how the batteries gave them backup in case of emergencies. Slowly but surely, other farms began to take notice. At first, it was just 1 or 2 farmers who were curious. Then, it was 5, 10, and soon enough, word had spread through the town. The local energy co-op even approached Jake, asking for advice on how to integrate more solar energy into the local grid. Jake was surprised by the interest, but it felt right. He wasn't just helping his own farm anymore. He was helping his community. Together, they could create something sustainable, something that could provide stability in a world where unpredictability seemed to be the only constant. One day, Jake received a call from the mayor of the town, a woman named Laura Carter, who had been following the progress of Jake's farm closely. She invited him to a town meeting, where the topic would be the future of local agriculture and energy. Jake was both nervous and excited about the invitation. He had always believed in the power of grassroots efforts, but this was a chance to take things to the next level. If he could convince the town council to adopt more renewable energy initiatives, it would be a game-changer not just for farmers, but for everyone in the area. When Jake stood up at the meeting, he was met with skeptical glances and questioning stares. The council members had heard of him, but this was a big leap. He took a deep breath and began speaking with the same passion and sincerity that had carried him through every challenge so far. "We've been through a lot here on our farm," he began. "We've faced storms, power outages, and high energy costs. But over the past year, we've made a change. We've installed solar panels, invested in energy storage, and shifted the way we approach power. And it's working." Jake paused, letting the words settle. "I'm not here to sell you a product or push you into a corner. I'm here to share what we've learned and offer a solution. Renewable energy can help us reduce costs, become more resilient, and even create new opportunities for jobs and growth. The future is unpredictable, but we have the power to shape it." As he spoke, Jake noticed that the skeptical stares were slowly turning into nods of interest. It wasn't a magic moment, but it was enough to make him feel like he was making a difference. After the meeting, Mayor Carter approached Jake with a smile. "I think you've convinced them, Jake. They're interested. Now, we just have to figure out how to make it happen." Jake felt a wave of relief and excitement wash over him. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the start of something important. A shift. A change. Over the next few months, the town began implementing renewable energy projects, starting with solar panels on community buildings and energy efficiency initiatives for local businesses. The ripple effect from Jake's farm had grown far beyond his expectations. It wasn't just a few farms, it was the entire community working toward a common goal of sustainability and resilience. Jake and Emily's farm continued to serve as a model, but now they were part of a much bigger movement. The local energy co-op had partnered with SolarX to provide affordable renewable energy solutions to farmers and households alike. What began as a personal project had blossomed into a community-wide effort to embrace the future. One evening, as Jake and Emily stood together in the yard, looking at the newly installed panels on the barn and the expanded system that powered the entire farm, Jake felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had faced storms, both literal and figurative, but they had persevered. Now, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And so was the community. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," Emily said, her voice filled with wonder. Jake smiled, his arm around her shoulder. "It's just the beginning. The future's bright, and we're not just building for us, we're building for everyone. Emily looked up at him, a smile lighting up her face. I think we're exactly where we're meant to be. Jake turned his gaze to the horizon, where the last rays of the setting sun cast a warm glow over the fields. It wasn't just the end of another day, it was the start of a new chapter. And he was ready for whatever came next. The months that followed were filled with progress, and the farm that Jake and Emily had worked so hard to build was now a beacon of innovation and sustainability. The ripple effect from their efforts had spread far beyond their town, inspiring neighboring communities and farmers to embrace renewable energy solutions, as Jake had once hoped. The solar panels that stretched across their fields were no longer just a symbol of their independence from the grid, they were a testament to the vision they had fought for. It wasn't just about the farm anymore, it was about creating a future where agriculture and technology could coexist and thrive in harmony. But even as their successes continued to pile up, Jake knew that their journey wasn't finished. No matter how much they'd accomplished, there was always more work to do. The world was changing, and so too would their farm. With every new milestone came new challenges, and Jake wasn't the kind of person to rest on his laurels. It was a warm afternoon when Jake and Emily received a call that would mark a significant turning point for the farm. It was from a local university that specialized in agricultural technology. They had been following the progress of Jake's farm for months, and now they wanted to partner with him on a new project, one that could push their sustainable farming efforts to an even higher level. The university had a cutting-edge research department focused on regenerative agriculture, and they believed that Jake's farm could serve as the perfect testing ground for a new type of soil restoration technique. The project would combine advanced data analytics, renewable energy, and innovative farming practices to create a model for farms everywhere. Jake and Emily were both intrigued but cautious. It was a big commitment, and they had to be sure it aligned with their vision. After several meetings, presentations, and discussions with the research team, they were convinced. This was an opportunity to not only elevate their farm but to share their knowledge with the world. It was time to take their success to the next level. As the new project took shape, Jake found himself juggling more than ever before. Between managing the farm, overseeing the solar energy system, and now working with the university's research team, his days were filled with tasks and meetings. Emily, ever his support, had taken on more responsibility at the farm, ensuring everything ran smoothly in his absence. They made a great team, and Jake knew he couldn't do it without her. The new project involved monitoring soil health in real time, using a combination of sensors, drones, and satellite technology to track soil conditions, moisture levels, and nutrient density. The data collected would be used to fine-tune their farming practices, ensuring the highest levels of sustainability and efficiency. By pairing the solar power system with this new technology, Jake could now manage the farm's energy usage in real time, using the data to power irrigation systems and equipment only when necessary. It was a bold move. It was risky, but it was exactly the kind of challenge Jake thrived on. The partnership with the university opened up new doors, and soon they were attracting attention from other farmers, agricultural organizations, and even venture capitalists interested in sustainable farming practices. But as Jake and Emily dove deeper into the project, they found themselves at a crossroads. The demands of the new partnership with the university were growing, and with the increased attention came a new set of pressures. There were long hours, endless data to analyze, and the constant need to balance their commitment to the farm with their new responsibilities. Jake began to feel the weight of it all. He knew the future was bright, but it was also uncertain, and he couldn't help but question whether he had spread himself too thin. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and reports, Emily noticed the exhaustion on his face. She had been watching him carefully over the past few weeks. He hadn't been sleeping well, and the strain was beginning to show. "You okay?" she asked softly, her hand resting gently on his. Jake looked up, his eyes tired but filled with determination. "Yeah. I don't know, Em. There's so much going on. I'm worried I might be losing sight of the farm, of what we built here. Emily sat down across from him, her eyes full of understanding. Jake, you're doing amazing things. You've already created something that's changing lives, not just ours, but everyone around here. But that doesn't mean you have to do it all alone. We've got a team now. It's okay to lean on others. Jake sighed, rubbing his forehead. I know. I just don't want to let anyone down. You won't, she reassured him. But you've got to take care of yourself, too. We're in this together. You don't have to carry everything on your shoulders. Jake looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew she was right. It wasn't about doing it all by himself. The farm, the community, and their new projects were all part of a bigger vision, a vision that was bigger than any one person. He had built something incredible, but now he had to trust that others would be there to help carry it forward. In the weeks that followed, Jake took Emily's advice to heart. He began delegating more tasks to the team, empowering others to take on leadership roles and make decisions. He worked more closely with the university's researchers, relying on their expertise to help guide the project while focusing on what he did best, managing the farm, leading the community, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The farm continued to thrive, and the data collected from the soil health monitoring system proved invaluable. The results were promising: improvements in soil fertility, better crop yields, and increased resilience to droughts and storms. The farm was becoming a model for what sustainable agriculture could look like in the future. But beyond the technological advancements and the growing success of the farm, Jake realized that the most important thing they had built was the community. They had shown others that with innovation, determination, and a willingness to adapt, it was possible to thrive in a world that often felt uncertain and unpredictable. As Jake stood in the barn late one evening, looking out at the fields that had become his life's work, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had come a long way from the days when he was unsure whether the farm would survive, and now he was part of something bigger, something that would impact not just his community, but the world. Emily joined him, her presence always a grounding force in the midst of their busy lives. Together, they looked out at the future they were building, side by side. It's more than we ever imagined, isn't it? Emily said, her voice full of awe. Jake smiled, wrapping his arm around her. Yeah. It really is. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt a deep sense of peace. The journey wasn't over, but it had come full circle. They had built something that would last, a legacy not just for their farm, but for the generations to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?